Alright, hello everybody, this is Antonio Wolf. We're continuing the Phenomenology Spirit Preface. Last time we ended at section 39. Uh, Hit that like, and if you're not subscribed, subscribe. By the way, just a little rant. YouTube just keeps getting worse, doesn't it? They removed the search by most recent upload feature. Uh, and even if you look up, like, well, what's like this week or this month, like, it's horrible. I think somewhere will be like past like scrolling, like after like the third page, it just keeps repeating the same crap. But anyways, makes it a lot more difficult for people to find stuff, which makes it a lot more difficult to find my stuff. Anyways, 39. The true and the false belong to those determinate thoughts that count as motionless essences on their own, one of which is on one side while the other is on the other, each standing fixed and isolated with nothing in common with the other. Against this view it must be maintained. It must... What? Huh, there's a typo. Found a genuine typo. Against this view it must be maintained that truth is not a minted coin that is ready to be given and pocketed just as it is. Nor is there, emphasis on the is there, the being of. Nor is there a false any more than there is an evil. The evil and the false are not, of course, as bad as the devil, for in the devil they are even made into a particular subject. As the false and the devil, they are only universals, though each has its own essentiality in contrast to the other. The false, for here it is only of this that we speak, would be the other of substance, its negative, while substance, as content of knowledge, is the true. But substance is itself essentially the negative, partly as differentiation and determination of the content, partly as a simple differentiating, that is, as self and knowledge in general. One can surely know falsely. If something is known falsely, this means that knowledge is in disparity with its substance. But in fact, this disparity is differentiating in general, which is an essential moment. So there you go. The disparity is differentiation in general. So falsehood has something to do with differentiation. You make things different, you set them apart. So partiality. Out of this differentiating, to be sure, their parity emerges, and this emergent parity is truth. I have to say, I like his word choices on certain things. I like that. Parity. You usually don't hear about this. You don't hear that word used that way, but it totally makes sense to use it that way. I mean, it's being paired. So out of its... In setting things apart, differentiating them, you are also setting them in connection. You are pairing them. And this emergent pairing is the truth. They're being paired. Together yet different is the truth. But it is not truth in such a way that the disparity has been discarded like dross from pure metal, not even like the tool that remains detached from the finished vessel. In the true as such disparity... Oh, that is good. Disparity and parity. Oh, that is good. I'm gonna do something with that. You know, you're too deep into philosophy and you nerd out about like simple word usage like this. When you get to the big leagues, you will understand. You will understand why people like Heidegger like obsess over this shit. It gets really good. By the way, just a simple comment on that. I forget who I was talking to. It was either text or in voice, and something about this came up. I think it was over text here somewhere. And I was talking to them about the whole translation stuff going on and how I now have a vivid sense about why it is that the translation issue isn't what people think. So when you read stuff about, well, Hegel uses words or Heidegger uses words, you hear this more with Heidegger than with Hegel, that they use words that just cannot be translated. The reason they cannot be translated is not because the concept cannot be explained in our language. The reason they cannot be translated is because words in one language have a range of broadness and associations and etymologies that allow certain direct syntactic connections to other things united in a concept. Every language has, even English, which is a mongrel language, even English has certain things that you can do in its language conceptually because of the associations of words in that language that cannot be done in another language. For example, the word cleave in English, and this is a rare one, but still it does exist. It has an ancient meaning, mostly biblical apparently, where cleave is a spelling of another word that used to be very different, which converged to be spelled the same as cleave, like to cleave things apart, where I think it's clefon, which is not cleave, like splitting apart, but like, to put things together. It's kind of a glue. And so that was spelled cleave. So we have cleave spelled the same as this other cleave. And so if you can use cleave both as putting things together or splitting them apart. Now, if you do that purposefully in English, you can do a lot of things that will be near impossible to translate into any other language because that's a very unique English convergence. So stuff like that, if one philosophized, if one took the concept of Hegel and didn't worry about the words and the connection in the German of those words that Hegel was working with, but rearticulated as a connection in English words, you could also create a philosophy in English which will not be translatable to any other philosophy. So, this kind of gets rid of the mystique that certain languages have. I mean, German's still better for philosophizing for various reasons, but you could do some very genuine English philosophy. That's just a complete side tangent, but it's been on my mind. So continuing. However, this does not mean that we can say that the false constitutes a moment, let alone a component of the true. Interesting. In every falsehood, there is something true. In this saying, truth and falsity are treated like oil and water, which cannot be mixed and are only externally combined. It is precisely because of the significance of designating the moment of complete otherness that the expressions for truth and falsity must no longer be used where their otherness has been sublated, upheaved. Just a reminder, I'm changing sublation to upheaved. If you want to know my reasons, look up my blog on that. Similarly, talk of the unity of subject and object, of finite and infinite, of being and thinking, etc., has the drawback that object and subject, etc., signify that they are outside the unity, and so in their unity they are not meant to be what their expression suggests. In the same way, the false is no longer as false a moment of truth. Interesting. Let me read that because here's the first time there was some stuff that I didn't comment on. So the true and the false belong to those determinate thoughts that count as motionless essences on their own, one of which is on one side while the other is on the other, each standing fixed and isolated with nothing in common with the other. Well, I mean, that's pretty simple. We usually treat truth and falsity as being just complete opposite things, incommensurable, and which is weird because falsehood is non-being. It doesn't exist, so it's not a thing. So it can't really stand opposite to truth, yet we treat it that way. It's a toward dualism. It's kind of substance dualism implicitly. And even people who don't believe in substance dualism nonetheless do this. So against this view, it must be maintained that truth is not a minted coin that is ready to be given and pocketed just as it is. So You got to work for truth. That's been already established throughout a lot of these sections, that truth is a process that is completed. You don't get it from the beginning. Although it's there from the beginning, you can't say you have it as it truly is in its beginning. I use truth in the definition right there. As it fully is, let's say. Fully is in the beginning. So, nor is there false. This is a common view of falsehood and evil, that they aren't complete non-being, any more than there is an evil. The evil and the false are not, of course, as bad as the devil, for in the devil they are even made into a particular subject. Which is, by the way, an odd thing. It's why, believe it or not, in Christian theology, at least anybody who knows Christian theology will tell you, the devil cannot actually be understood as being absolutely evil, because they would not be in that case. So even the devil has something good about them. That's why they can exist at all. It's the very goodness of their being. So as the false and the devil, they are only universals, though each has its own essentiality in contrast to the other. So what does he mean by universals here? Well, recall that universals are immediacies, and immediacies are what? Abstractions. So falsehood and evil are abstractions from the truth. The false, for here it is only of this that we speak, would be the other of substance. It's negative, while substance as content of knowledge is the true. But substance is itself essentially the negative, partly as differentiation, determination of the content, partly as a simple differentiating, that is, as self and knowledge in general. So, falsehood is non-being against substance, or the insubstantial, and it would therefore be purely negative. But what have we established seeing up until this point? Well, that's the negative is what there is. So substance is itself essentially the negative, partly as differentiation, determination of the content. So that's because substance is itself negated in being differentiated, it has internal distinctions, and partly as a simple differentiating, that meaning that it is a differentiating itself. So it is the negating of its internal distinctions. So it is the power or the process of negating. And that is as self and knowledge in general. So there you go, a bunch of identities. One can surely know falsely. If something is known falsely, this means that knowledge is in disparity with its substance. But in fact, this disparity is differentiating in general, which is an essential moment. Out of this differentiating, to be sure, their parity emerges, and this emergent parity is the truth. So, however, I'm just going to skip down to the highlight section again. However, this does not mean that we can say that the false constitutes a moment, let alone a component of the true. So insofar as we call things false, this is a mere abstraction as abstraction alone. So to say it's a mere abstraction as abstraction alone is to say that we are taking this as if it is absolute. That in itself is a false position which does not have any partial truth as that position as a whole. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to somebody like who you'd have to write this down, honestly, like think about it. It's hard to explain in words. Because there's a sense in which, okay, so if falsity is disparity. And with knowledge, I mean, this is pretty easy, right? I think, I'm touching, I don't know, a cat or something, and in fact, it's one of those things that destroy everything. Honey badgers. Well, the honey badger is just not a cat. The only thing it has in common with a cat is it's furry, it's an animal, has biological functions, But beyond that, that's not the case. a disparity that's proper would be something that's just completely opposite. Like, suppose, I go to I buy something off online, say off Facebook Marketplace or whatever, and I go and I meet the person, and they're like, first I need you to give me the money, and then I'll give you a thing. Okay, so I give them the money, and then they give me a box. It doesn't have the thing that I want; it's something else. There's a disparity there. It's false that the thing that I got was a false thing. That false thing, as false, is not truly part of the thing that I was trying to get. So as the particular thing taken as a whole, it has no part in truth. But if you take the portions of what makes that thing appear to have been the thing that I thought I was getting, it has partial truth. The point is, do not make this mistake in saying that falsehood is a part of truth. I will admit to you that I have made this mistake before in the phrasing, because the phrasing it's kind of easy to fall into. But in the meaning, I've never been confused. So if you've heard me say anything in my videos about that, I apologize. I was wrong. But I did it in the right spirit. Continue. Section 40. Dogmatism as a way of thinking in knowledge and in the study of philosophy is nothing but the opinion that the true consists in a proposition which is a fixed result or which is immediately known. To such questions as when Caesar was born, how many yards there were in a stadium, in which stadium, etc., a clear-cut answer should be given, just as it is definitely true that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides of a right-angled triangle. But the nature of a so-called truth of that kind is different from the nature of philosophical truth. In the science of logic, he will come up with an exact term for this. This is distinction between correctness and true. Dates, like when Caesar was born, sizes, like the size of a stadium, these can be called correct facts. You can make correct statements, direct alignments that are non-divergent, that they are in parity with what you're referring to. But dates themselves aren't a thing. They're just relative determinations we make. And yards themselves aren't things. They're just relative determinations we make. So the object itself, in this case, is not actually a thing, properly speaking. It only appears to be on a surface level of abstraction. But it's not really a thing. So not only is the thing, not only is our statement about it not something we can say is true, we can only say it's correct, the thing itself is not true. It is not a thing. It's a very interesting and a very useful distinction for you to have in your life. I use it a lot. So dogmatism has to do with correctness. '41. Give me a sec, just checking some. As regards historical truths, to mention these briefly, insofar as their purely historical aspect is considered, it is readily granted that they concern the singular existence, the contingent and arbitrary aspect of a content, determinations of it that are not necessary. But even such plain truths as the examples cited are not without the movement of self-consciousness. To know one of them, a good deal of comparison is called for, books must be consulted, or in some way or other research has to be undertaken. Even in the case of an immediate intuition, only the knowledge of the intuition along with its grounds is regarded as something true, something of true value, although it is really only the bare result that we are supposed to be concerned about. Okay. That little paragraph said nothing much. 42. Here's a famous one. Math. Just FYI, if you don't know anything about math, like I did not for a long time, besides, obviously you take math classes, but what you learn in math classes in your school days is not what mathematicians do. Mathematicians don't sit around, crunching numbers. That's not the interesting part of math. They sit around trying to prove things, and proofs are very different to crunching numbers. I suggest two sources for you, and I will try to remember to write them down in the comments. There's a YouTube channel called Insights into Mathematics. What's his name? Insights into Mathematics by Norman Wildburger. So the channel on YouTube is Insights into Mathematics by Norman Wildburger. He has a gigantic, 200 plus video list critiquing modern mathematics. Start from the beginning, and I think somewhere around the first 10 videos you can kind of then jump around as much as you want, but he will show you how an incredible amount of our current top mathematics is nothing but a complete logical fiction. That people are just talking about things that do not make any sense at all. All right, sorry. Anyways, yeah, check out Norman Waldberger's channel. And for a book, let me look up the exact title. The exact title is Negative Math. It's Negative Math, How Mathematical Rules Can Be Positively Bent by Alberto A. Martinez, who is also based in that he's I think a historian of science more than anything, but he's also aware of a lot of our scientific theories they don't come up in the way that people think. It's not like people just going in objectively observing things and just figuring the world out. There's a lot of personal sociological stuff that goes on there. So check out those two sources so that you can know for yourself. And those are not from an external point of mathematics. One, Engin Waldberger is a professor of mathematics, a PhD. He knows his stuff. And in the book on negative math, well, it's just kind of a history of mathematics where he just kind of goes and shows you internally what the debates were about regarding negative numbers and imaginary numbers, which reveals a lot of interesting things conceptually. So what Hegel's saying here is sadly not as interesting as what they say, but is shitting on mathematics as the standard of what science should look like and how truth is ascertained is very true. And just give me a second. All right, 42. As for mathematical proofs, truths, we would be even less likely to regard someone as a geometer if he knew Euclid's theorems outwardly by rote, without knowing their proofs, without, as we might express the contrast, knowing them inwardly. One might say that in geometry, one of the most useful things is the Pythagorean square proofs, which were originally only meant with the squares. It's a squared plus b squared equals c squared for a reason. It's not the square root of a plus square root of b equals square root of c. That's why you get irrational numbers when you take the root of c in many cases, which you don't get if you just keep it at a square, which is what it was originally designed to be, and that's what it's based around, because that's what you can actually measure, whereas you cannot measure, say, the square root of 2. Ain't gonna happen. So, similarly, the information that the sides of right-angled triangles have the familiar relationship to each other would be regarded as unsatisfactory if someone were to acquire it by measuring many right-angled triangles. So you can't be an empiricist about the Pythagorean theorem or the construction of right triangles, although some people think that you can. Well, they believe that they can. They don't actually think, because if they thought, they'd realize that's nonsense. We don't get the rules for how to construct triangles from observing triangles. However, even in mathematical cognition, the essentialness of the proof, I would have used essentiality, of the proof does not yet have the significance and nature of being a moment of the result itself. In the result, the proof is past and vanished. Indeed. Once you have your theorem, it doesn't matter how you came up with the theorem or whether anybody knows that the theorem is proven. The theorem will do what it does. It will produce the answer readily for you. Since it is a result, the theorem is, of course, a theorem seen to be true. Oh, that is very clever. So here he's appealing even to the mathematicians, because he's shitting on them, to say, look, even they recognize that truth can only be grasped as a result. So only when you have made it a result can you say that the theorem is actually true. All right. But this added circumstance does not affect its content, but only the relationship to the subject. The movement of the mathematical proof does not belong to that which is the object. It is an operation external to the thing. So here the object or the thing is either the proof, either the theorem itself, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, or the thing that the theorem is applied to. Say, you're applying the Pythagorean theorem to this particular right triangle with, a 1, 1, 2, a 1, 1 side with a hypotenuse. That's square root of 2, supposedly. Or a 1, 2, 3 triangle. The theorem itself does not generate its content. The movement of mathematical proof does not belong to that which is the object. So, or rather, the object in this case does not produce the proof itself. Thus, the nature of the right-angled triangle does not divide itself up in just the way presented in the construction that is needed for the proof of the proposition expressing its relationship. The entire production of the result is a process and means of cognition. Now, in the philosophy of nature, it seems he changed his mind on this a little bit. He mentions that the Pythagorean theorem does approach what could be called a speculative proof in geometry. Now, the reason is not because the symbolic math itself actually has to do with this. That's merely an external appearance. The reason has to do with the very idea of the lines, the angles, and the enclosure of a space within lines and angles. That when you take that as the actual element of the triangle, as the minimal enclosure of that space, the right triangle will be what will be determined, and then the right triangle is what produces the Pythagorean theorem. But as it normally is presented to you, indeed, it is not the case that you can say that the parts generate each other and generate the whole. In philosophical cognition, too, the becoming of the existence as existence is different from the becoming of the essence or of the inner nature of the thing. What is he referring to here? The only thing I can think of here is in the science of logic, you have, like, say, the concepts of being, where their becoming is from one appearance to another appearance, whereas in the becoming of essence, it's essence to appearance back to essence. Makes sense? But in the first place, philosophical cognition includes both, whereas mathematical cognition presents only the becoming of the existence, that is, the becoming of the being of the nature of the thing in cognition as such. Well, mathematical cognition presents only the becoming of the existence. That makes sense, because you're just shifting from one appearance to another. Here's the appearance of the unsolved theorem. Here's the appearance of the theorem with, now determinate inputs. Here's the appearance of the determinate result. Each one is an existent. They're not each other. They're distinct on that level. And so that is the becoming of the being of the nature of the thing in cognition as such. I don't know why being here is capitalized. That doesn't really make sense to me, because if he was referring to being itself, it would just be the becoming of being. But it's just being. You would just emphasize the being, the active being of the thing in cognition as such. So the mathematical cognition is the being of the nature of the thing in cognition as such. So it's the abstraction. In the second place, philosophical cognition also unifies these two particular movements. The inner emergence or becoming of the substance is an uninterrupted passage into externality or into existence, being for another, and conversely the becoming of the existence is the withdrawal into the essence. The movement is the twofold process and becoming of the whole, so that each one at the same time posits the other, and each therefore also has both of them in it as two aspects. Together they make up the whole by dissolving themselves and making themselves into its moments. So a repetition of what he's told us about the methodology and its dynamic movement before. Section 43. In mathematical cognition, insight is, for the thing, an external operation. It follows from this that the true thing is altered thereby. So while the means, construction and proof, no doubt contain true propositions, it must equally be said that the content is false. In the above example, the triangle is dismembered and its parts consigned to other figures, to which the construction gives rise in it. Only at the end is the triangle restored, the triangle we are really dealing with, which was lost from sight during the procedure, emerging only in fragments belonging to other wholes. So here we see the negativity of the content coming in as well. This negativity would have to be called a falsity of the content, with as much right as the disappearance of purportedly fixed thoughts in the movement of the concept. Well, it's just a continuation and expansion of what he said before. Section 44. But the real deficiency of this cognition concerns the cognition itself, as well as its material in general. So there you go. Mathematical cognition has two problems. One is the object of math, which is math itself, and then mathematical thinking. As regards the cognition, we do not, for the time being, see the necessity of the construction. It does not emerge from the concept of the theorem. It is rather imposed, and the instruction to draw just these lines when infinitely many others could be drawn has to be blindly obeyed without our knowing anything more than how to have the innocent faith that this will serve the purpose of carrying out the proof. Afterwards, this purposiveness also reveals itself, and for this reason it is only an external purposiveness, because it reveals itself only afterwards in the course of proof. Similarly, the proof follows a path that begins somewhere at a point whose relation to the result that is supposed to emerge is not yet known. As it advances, it takes up these determinations and relations, and leaves others aside in accordance with a necessity that we do not immediately discern. An external purpose governs this movement. Yet again, an expansion of what's been said before. Section 45. Mathematics is proud of the self-evidence of this defective cognition, and flaunts it even in the face of philosophy, but it is based solely on the poverty of its purpose and the defectiveness of its material, and is therefore a kind that philosophy must disdain. It's a very highbrow way to say that mathematics and mathematicians suffer the Dunning-Kruger effect. The purpose or concept of mathematics is magnitude. This is precisely the inessential, the unconceptual relationship. Accordingly, the movement of knowing proceeds on the surface, does not touch the thing itself, not the essence or the concept. It is therefore no conceptual comprehension. Now, just off the top of your head, think about this, okay? Why would magnitude be unessential? Well, magnitude is relational. It's derivative. It is relative. Magnitudes are magnitudes of something that is being measured in that magnitude. So it is inessential, unconceptual relationship. Now, the unconceptual part is mainly in that the way we treat magnitudes, the way we treat numbers and all these other things, is unconceptually. We don't really think about them as a generative unity. They're just abstractions, mere symbolic representations of aggregations. According to the movement of knowing proceeds on the surface, okay. The material regarding which mathematics provides a gratifying treasury of truths is space and the unit. So here this is a kind of a gloss on something that Kant brings up. One, originally mathematics is geometry. Abstract mathematics of numbers did not exist. This abstraction of mathematics became a thing only after the introduction of like algebras, which happened relatively recently. Somewhere around the times of about the 1500s, does this start to be a thing. After numbers as such, this abstraction of algebras is introduced, math starts being explicitly related not anymore to geometry, to space, but to time because of its abstraction. Kant relates it that way, and so does Hegel. Hegel says that he here mentions space and unit in the philosophy of nature. He mentions that the unit is merely the abstraction of the point in time. Space is the existence in which the concept inscribes its distinctions as in an empty, dead element in which they are just as motionless and lifeless. The actual is not something spatial as it is considered in mathematics. Neither concrete sensory intuition nor philosophy is concerned with such non-actuality as the things of mathematics are. So space is dead as a dead element, motionless and lifeless. That's just what it is. So we usually think about it as a container. Hegel does not agree that it's a container. But there you go. Even if you don't think about it, whichever way you think it is, a substance or a container or whatever. Space is just simply an extension. It doesn't move. Time moves. The actual is not something spatial as is considered in mathematics. Neither concrete sensory intuition nor philosophy is concerned with such non-actuality as things in mathematics are. Here by the actual, in an everyday sense, I mean, well, reality, the actual, your existence is not reducible to something spatial, cannot be captured merely as spatiality. In such a non-actual element, there is, after all, only non-actual truth, that is, rigid, dead propositions, which is also why the word correct is quite fitting. Rectitude. Even mathematics uses the language of rigor. Rigid. They like their rigor. We can stop at any one of them. The next proposition starts for itself anew without the first proposition moving on to the other, without a necessary connection arising this way through the nature of the thing itself. Okay, that's actually a very, very important distinction. This is not just a difference between philosophy and mathematics. This is a distinction between thinking and not thinking at all. Thinking and belief, let's say. So even what is largely called philosophy today operates in this way, in which you have P1, P2, P3, conclusion, blah, blah, blah. From P1, there is no connection to P2. From P2, there's no connection to P1, except it might be that P2 builds upon P1 and analytically contains P1, but P1 does not contain P2. And then you may have a P3, and you could also do the same thing, in which either P1, P2, P3, the relationship is external, in which the only thing that they're being put forth as is that they are not contradictory. And therefore, in some conclusion, you can unify them because they're not contradictory. Or they may have an analytic relationship in which you have P1, upon which P2 is built on, and it does not contradict P1, so it's coherent with it, but it contains P1 retroactively. And then you have a P3 that likewise does it to P2 and P1, and so on. Then you have the conclusion, which likewise does it for all of them. In all those cases, you don't really have a moving thought, where the next proposition starts for it, without the first proposition moving on to the other. So where the first proposition naturally leads you to the second proposition naturally leads you to a third proposition, and then to a conclusion, etc. When you first encounter this kind of claim, I'm sure that if you're someone listening and you haven't done this yourself, you're not quite sure what in the hell this could be exemplified by. Because we've already seen that there are the examples of organisms. But that's not quite right, because the way we normally think about organisms is precisely the same way we think about this problem, in which we have rigid things. We say, well, first an animal is a sperm, it's a zygote, it's a sperm and an egg, and then when they come together, they fertilize, and then you get to the fetus, and the fetus has these stages, and blah, blah, blah. From each, however, if you had each on its own, you would just treat it on its own. A fetus is just a fetus. There's nothing inherent to it as a fetus that makes it grow into anything else. This is why, somebody can have an abortion, and there's a look, it's technically not a person, because right now it's a fetus, and yeah, sure, a year down the line when it was born, it might be considered a person, but right now it's not a person, so we don't care about what it might be in the future, because that's not what it is, and it's not inherently connected to it now anyways. Yeah, that's a good example, in that the distinction here would be that Hegel will tell you, no, that thing down the line that you're saying doesn't matter now because it's not present now, is in a way importantly present now. in the fetus. It is a human being implicitly, and this must be, and even though it's implicit now, it is implicitly actually that which is going to become. You cannot then act in relation to this thing as if what it is implicitly has no bearing on what you think about it and how you deal with it and what its consequences are. I'm not sure if that example makes anything clear. Let me know in the comments, or any of you listening, if you want a better example, because it's kind of hard to think about these things on the fly. For those who don't know, I'm rereading this for the first time after like almost a decade, and I'm not pre-reading it before recording it with the group. So continuing, moreover, because of this principle and element, and herein consists the formalism of mathematical self-evidence, knowledge proceeds on the line of equality. For what is dead, since it does not move itself, does not arrive at distinctions of essence, at essential opposition or inequality, nor therefore at the passage of opposite into opposite, does not attain to qualitative immanent movement, to self-movement. By the way, a comment on self-evidence. So yeah, mathematics is said to be, like the only self-evident science, because it can show its indubitable results and procedures. Hegel's philosophical method is also a self-evident method. A lot of people point to axioms and say, by axioms we mean something that is self-evident, that just shows itself to be true. Now, for the regular axiom, like the axioms of mathematics or the axioms of other philosophers, what they mean is, well, this seems obvious to me. Well, what is obvious to you is not in itself obvious. And with Hegel's philosophy, it's not just something that is obvious to me, it's something that is in itself obvious. It shows itself, it evidences itself. So it is self-evident in that it develops itself before me and shows me what it is. That's the self-evidentiality. So if by axioms you understand something that's just like obvious, self-evident, obvious, truth is never obvious at the beginning. That's why we don't have it at the beginning. But it is self-evident. So, and now that's something that I'm saying. Hegel doesn't say this, but this is my formulation in language for you. So then on equality, he's mentioning, he's pointing out that that equality is kind of the big function in mathematics, which, by the way, is symbolized by the equal sign. But equality isn't a single concept in mathematics. Wildburger, the channel Insights to Mathematics, has a whole video talking about the many meanings that the equal sign has in mathematics, in contexts. So even mathematicians are not talking about the same thing all the time just because they're using the same symbols. So he mentions here's the distinctions of essence at essential opposition to equality. So an essence is that which is not in appearance. So internal to the essence is the distinction against an appearance. Otherwise, it would just be, we just talk about being. So we're talking about essence, we're already talking about a differentiated, distinguished being, which, because it is distinguished, because it is internal to itself to be distinguished, is alive. It is not dead. So essential opposition or inequality, nor therefore at the passage of opposite into opposite. This opposite of opposite language he uses a few times throughout this book. Honestly, you should use it a lot more, because that's really the opposite of the opposite, negative of the negative. Reflexivity is just inherent to the method. So it does not attain to qualitative immanent movement to self-movement. For it is only magnitude of the unessential distinction that mathematics considers. It abstracts from the fact that it is the concept that divides space into dimensions and determines the connections between them and within them. It does not, for example, consider the relationship of the line to the surface, and when it compares the diameter of the circle with its circumference, it runs up against their incommensurability. That is, a relationship of the concept and infinite that eludes mathematical determination. He clearly changes his mind by the time he writes the Science of Logic as well. In the Science of Logic, he has a concept of magnitude. So, again, he's referring to how magnitude is commonly conceived by anyone other than himself. And so he's not going to be focused on the derivation of such concepts here. He's not going to bother telling you about the concept of magnitude, but he does have a concept. He comes up with it later on. How much time we got? Going for an hour, so 46. Section 46. Immanent so-called pure mathematics also does not place time as time in juxtaposition to space as the second material of its consideration. Applied mathematics does indeed deal with time as well with motion and other actual things, but it takes up these synthetic propositions, that is, propositions about the relationships which are determined by their concept from experience, and only applies its formula to these presuppositions. Seems to me he's describing here the use of mathematics in physics. Applied mathematics often gives so-called proofs of propositions, such as those regarding the equilibrium of the lever. I was right. Or the relationship of space and time in the motion of falling, etc. But the fact that these are presented and acted as proofs itself only proves how great is the need of proof for cognition, because where it has nothing else, cognition respects even the empty semblance of proof and gains some satisfaction from it. A critique of these proofs would be both noteworthy and instructive, serving both to purify mathematics of this false adornment and to show its limits, and hence the necessity of another kind of knowledge. And he critiques these in a lot of places. He critiques in the Science of Logic, Philosophy of Nature, even in his selection of the Proofs of God. He has like a whole couple of chapters critiquing mathematical proof. As regards time, one would suppose that it would constitute, as the counterpart of space, the material of the other part of mere mathematics, but it is the concept itself that exists. So as regards time, one would suppose that it would constitute, as the counterpart of space, the material of the other part of pure mathematics. Okay. There's a better way he phrases it in the Philosophy of Nature, where he mentions the question of, okay, we have a science of a mathematics of space we call geometry. You would think there would be a science or mathematics of time, but there isn't, and there can't be. Because time has no collateral relationship as time itself. All representations of time end up treating time as spatial rather than temporal itself. But time is just the coming to be and ceasing to be of space. It has no collaterality. The collaterality of time just appears as the collaterality of space itself.
Can I ask something here?
Yeah.
Oh, were you planning to do a designated question time afterwards, or?
No.
Okay. I was waiting to ask you about this because you brought it up earlier, and you seem now to be saying something different to what you said earlier. You earlier it seemed like you said there is no quote unquote mathematics of time, but earlier you were kind of identifying that as algebra. And
No.
I've seen Avalonia do that too, where he says that time quite literally is the externalization of algebra or something like that.
Oh, I don't know what Avalonia means by that, but no, I would not consider algebra to be anything relating to time. Like, I mean, how would that
Did you
even make
not?
sense? No, I did not.
Did you not?
No, I did not
I
say that.
swear you did.
Well, I did.
I swear you did. But
Well,
okay.
you might have misheard me, or I somehow it might have spoken, but I would not say that there's any mathematics that corresponds to time because that makes no sense. Time has no differences on the level of time. You understand what that means? So from like the point of this moment of time to that moment of time, the difference cannot be mapped out in any way other than it's not this other moment. But that's it. Like, it's not quantifiable as a rate. It's not quantifiable as a relationship of how much time. It's impossible. So that's why we don't have a mathematics of time or a science of time, because there's nothing there that you can ever get a hold of, because time is just this dissolution.
Well, you say there can't be any relationship, and you go on to say you can't say how much time. Uh,
Yeah,
but
there's no quantity to time. Time has no rate.
well, yes, it has no rate because the science of rate would be analysis. So
Well,
that would be
it has no quantity like a rate, because time is a change. So you have a distances and all these other things, extensions in space, units, but there is no unit of time. Time is a moment, but the moment is just an immediately becoming, ceasing to be. Uh, you cannot quantify it. It's impossible. All quantifications of time are really just specifications of one state of space to another state of space, mediated by a certain whole, which we have made the measure of both of those states. This has nothing to do with time as such. So I don't know how any mathematics could be the expression of time itself. Well, it makes no sense to me.
okay. Well, I guess I'll look at the replay because I'm curious to know what you said now. But you went on a whole thing about algebra and you connected it to time in some way. But I'll have to look at
Well,
back.
what I mentioned was that when algebra was brought in, people started connecting it to time. So, and by people, I mean Kant. Kant specifically says that he thinks mathematics, pure numbers in algebra, functions on the abstraction of units of time. That's what I said.
Okay.
But the unit of time has no quantity. And whenever you try to unify it, what you're doing is unifying it through representations of spatiality. So he says, but time, is the constant itself that exists. Uh, uh, you'll hear a lot of bullshit about this. People are like, oh, because people think like Hegel's making something special about time here, just kind of like how Heidegger or Bergson make time special. There's nothing special about time here. This is just like a kind of throwaway line, which like for Hegel, it's technically true, but it doesn't really mean much. Like, yeah, time is just the existence of the concept. The concept is nothing but the absolute becoming. Well, what is time? It also is just an endless becoming. So what? Time is just that pure becoming, intuited. But so is everything else. That's even atemporal things also have the structure of the concept. So there's nothing special about time with regards to this. Just FYI. So the principle of magnitude, of unconceptual difference, and the principle of equality, of abstract lifeless unity, cannot handle that pure unrest of life and of absolute differentiation. Oh, to clarify something, by the way, treatment, because I just popped in my head again. Okay, the reason it's connected to time, like algebra and pure numbers are connected to time, is because they're dealing with numbers as points. And points don't actually exist in space. The only things that we can point to that, like, I hate when I do that. The only thing that we can reference that is anywhere even close to actually being a point is time. A moment of time, because it is infinitely small quantitatively. It comes and it's gone instantaneously. That's why it's related to time, because we're no longer referencing extensional spaces, and we're not limited by the relationships of geometry. Now we can just relate abstract points to abstract points without any care about any spatial arrangement or anything like that. So that's where the reliance on the intuition of time comes in. So the principle of magnitude, of unconceptual difference, and the principle of equality, of abstract lifeless unity, cannot handle that pure unrest of life and of absolute differentiation. It is therefore only as paralyzed, namely as the unit, that this negativity becomes the second material of mathematic cognition. There you go. So he made it. So time frozen, so not treated as time, but treated as a unit, which is the abstract point. That this negativity becomes the second material of mathematical cognition, which as an external operation reduces what is self-moving to material in order to have it in it a now indifferent external lifeless content. So there you go. That's a relationship to time. Section 47. Philosophy, by contrast, considers not the inessential determination, but the determination insofar as it is essential. Its element and content is not the abstract or non-actual, but the actual, that which posits itself and lives within itself, existence in its concept. So the essential is the actual, that which posits itself and lives within itself, existence in its concept. This is so technically correct, but you could not know this even if you understood the phenomenology. This is like so loaded with concepts that he has not explicitly defined. Well, he might. Well, okay. I'll take that back. I haven't read the whole book. I've only read like about half of it. So he might actually somewhere make these things explicit in the way that he makes things explicit, I've already established that he never goes, it's like, here's how I'm defining something. But he just kind of like makes these identities that you just ought to catch on to. So maybe somewhere he tells us that existence is the differentiation of determinacy. And that we already have the concept. The concept is the overarching grasping and unity of a thing. So the distinction within the unity, that whole thing is the actual, which is also the essential. It is the process that generates and passes through its own moments, and this whole movement constitutes the positive and its truth. This truth, therefore, includes the negative too, that which would be called the false, if it could be regarded as something from which one should abstract. The evanescent should, on the contrary, itself be regarded as essential, not in the determination of a fixture which, cut off from the true, is to be left lying somewhere or other outside it, any more than the true is to be regarded as a dead, static positive on the other side. Appearance is the arising and passing away that does not itself arise and pass away, but is in itself and constitutes the actuality and movement of the life of truth. So yeah, here's a bit of definition. He'll repeat this in chapter 3, Force and Understanding. That when we talk about appearance, we're not talking about just the things changing before us that come and they arise and pass away, but we're talking about the universal structure of coming and passing away, which itself does not pass away. The true is thus the bacchanalian frenzy, in which no member is sober, and since each member immediately dissolves as soon as it breaks away, the frenzy is also transparent and simple repose. There you go. That's another of the famous quotes from this. In that movement's court of judgment, of course, the single shapes of spirit do not subsist any more than determinate thoughts do, but they are also positive and necessary moments as much as they are negative and evanescent. In the whole of the movement, a whole conceived as repose, which differentiates itself in the movement and gives itself particular existence, is preserved as something that recollects itself, whose existence is knowledge of its own self, while this self-knowledge is just as immediately existence. So Miller's translation is better on that. It's more poetic. Let me see how he phrases it. 47. So he says, the true is thus the bacchanalian revel in which no member is not drunk, yet because each member collapses as soon as he drops out, the revel is just as much transparent and simple repose. So the true is thus the bacchanalian frenzy in which no member is sober, and since each member immediately dissolves as soon as it breaks away, the frenzy is also transparent and simple repose. I'm going to take a wild guess that Miller's is the more correct translation, or rather more true translation, because this one just sounds like too technical. Even Hegel is not. I mean, Hegel's like technical and dry, but like this is the kind of stuff where he tends to not be technical and dry. So each member collapses as soon as, like, if you're talking about, like, you're making a metaphor. You're not going to drop the metaphor immediately after just like naming it. You're going to keep it going up until the end. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of making the reference to the metaphor. So the true is thus the bacchanalian revel in which no member is not drunk. So think about this. When you're drunk, or think about being in the zone. You're in the zone. You're in the thing. You're in flow state. Yet because each member collapses as soon as he drops out, so as long as you're in the dance, you're in the zone, you're fully in it, and the moment you step out of it, you're fully out of it again. The revel is just as much transparent as simple repose. So a lot of people make a big deal about this, that this is kind of confusing. Well, it really isn't. But yeah, you have to have the knowledge of the concept in the background. So the concept is nothing but this incessant movement. But the movement, and in the movement, you're alive, you're in the zone. But the moment you freeze the movement into any single point, it's like you're dropping out of the hole. And collapses as soon as it drops out. And the collapse can be just like the one, you're no longer moving, you're out of the dance, you're out of the stream of the movement. But the whole point of the dance is just to dance yourself to exhaustion. That is the end point. So the movement exists nothing but for the purpose of the stable collapse into rest. And then the only reason you're at rest is because you're gathering up your energies to get right back into the dance again. And then at its most perfect, the dance itself and the rest have no difference. Being collapsed and being in the dance have no essential distinction, because they're both actually parts of the same dance. There's a moment of the dance in which you're collapsed, there's a moment of the dance in which you're actively moving, but the dance involves both the movement and the collapse. And so when you're in the zone, you go from the movement to the collapse, which is itself a movement, and the collapse to the movement, which is itself a collapse of the collapsing. And from within, it all looks like one continuous dance, one continuous flow. Nothing really changes on that level. Only from the outside do you see here one moment, there one moment. But when you're inside, it's like a Mobius strip. If you walk on one side of the Mobius strip, you never notice when it is that you cross to, quote unquote, the other side. It always looks like one side to you, even though it's two sides, and it's always two sides. The Mobius strip has two sides, but technically it's one side because of topological hijinks. But that's how it is, and that's how this philosophy, that's how this thinking, and all thinking actually is. All thinking is nothing but this strange dance which includes its own non-dance as part of the dance. Hopefully that makes it clear, though you can tell me if you doubt it, and I might explain in the comments later on. So in that movement's court of judgment, of course, the single shapes of spirit do not subsist any more than determinate thoughts do, but they are also positive and necessary moments as much as they are negative and evanescent. So alone, each one, its whole entire purpose as a moment is to pass away to another moment. But they also do have a positive existence, and they are necessary. So they're not just nothing. They're not just negative in a purely abstract sense. In the whole of the movement, a whole conceived as repose. So think about it this way: change itself does not change. So movement itself does not move. So it is as movement in repose. What differentiates itself in the movement and gives it a particular existence is preserved as something that recollects itself. So the whole which breaks itself apart into each moment, the differences, is also through those differences whose existence, through those existences, through those parts, those moments, is preserved as something that recollects itself. He calls this negative unity later in like chapter 2 of the Phenomenology. He brings this up, that these moments are not each other, but in not being each other, they're negatively united. They're united by their own non-being each other. That's their own recollection. That is an upheaval, Aufhebung. That is a concept. So here the existence, whose existence is knowledge of its own self. Obviously here would be spirit or consciousness. While this self-knowledge is just as immediately existence. This is one of the ways in which, let me see how Miller phrases it. He says, in the whole of the movement, seen as a state of report which distinguishes itself therein and gives itself particular existence, is preserved as something that recollects itself, whose existence is self-knowledge, and whose self-knowledge is just as immediately existence. I like Miller's phrasing here better. Meaning, consciousness, remember that consciousness, the word literally is con with scientia, knowledge. Consciousness is not only, it gives itself as existence as knowing itself as consciousness, and whose knowing itself as consciousness is its existence as consciousness. So its knowledge of its own self-knowledge is the existence of its knowledge immediately. Consciousness is the knowledge of something, and it is knowledge itself that is the existence of consciousness. That's another way to put it. To 48, how long are we going? This begins another thematic. How long is this? Well, that's a long one. Method, so the inner life, the movement. Okay, this begins another theme that like these ones are long. It's a theme on method. So let's leave it there. Because I don't think I don't know if we can finish these. It depends how long we have. I have to comment on each of these. If it's very technical, it takes a long time. So I don't know if we can do this in the next like 40 minutes. Or do you guys want to continue? Phony, raining, tree man.
Well, I was just looking for something related to our discussion earlier, and I found something. Uh, if you're interested in hearing it,
Sure.
here we have it. Hold on. That's embarrassing. Okay, yeah, here we go. The idea of externality in its simple, immediate, and unrestricted form is, first of all, space, the subject matter of which is geometry. The second is the beginning of the idealization of space. The first negation and dissolution of the spatial separation is time in its original form, i.e., as number is the object of algebra.
Yeah, it's an analogy, but it's not an identity.
Okay. Would you say that? Would you feel comfortable saying that, or identifying in a stronger sense, space and geometry?
Yeah, like space and geometry are like directly tied. I mean, Hegel says like space is embodied mathematics, but time is not embodied mathematics. Time has no fucking structure. That's the poverty of time.
Okay, so this is all right.
Because I mean, look, like when he's saying like time is the dissolution and the fluidity of space. Well, in algebra is analogously that to number. Well, yeah, that's true. Like in algebra, what you're doing is like you're bringing operations upon number to transform it. And you're not taking this or that number. You're taking numbers as such as like structural relationships of numbers.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, yeah. Funny says he has to go. Oh, they have to go too, and then we'll leave it there then. That's a good place to stop because yeah, new theme starts. Theme on method, which is kind of funny because I mean he's already had like multiple paragraphs just kind of like reiterating the same things about methods slightly differently. Uh, we'll see. All right. For those of you listening on YouTube, enjoy.